The desert wind howled across the dusty streets of Red Hollow, a forgotten frontier town, tucked between endless mesas and dry riverbeds. It was the kind of place where strangers were noticed immediately, and that morning, everyone noticed her. The stagecoach rolled to a stop outside the crooked wooden platform that served as Red Hollow Station. The horses snorted and stomped as the driver climbed down, stretching his stiff back. The town looked half asleep. A couple of horses tied outside the Silver Spur Saloon flicked their tails lazily. A drunk cowboy leaned against a post, hat tipped low. The general store's bell jingled as someone stepped out carrying a sack of flour, but when the stagecoach door opened, every head slowly turned. A woman stepped down. She wore a simple traveling dress, the color of storm clouds, dust clinging to the hem. Her dark hair was tied neatly beneath a bonnet, though loose strands had escaped during the long ride. But it wasn't her clothes that caught people's attention. It was her eyes, sharp, observant, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. She looked around the town quietly, taking in the crooked buildings, the faded signs, the men watching her like coyotes studying prey. The stagecoach driver handed her a small suitcase. "Welcome to Red Hollow, miss," he said. "Can't say many ladies choose this place." She gave a faint smile. "Sometimes people don't choose where they go," she replied softly. Then she walked toward the town. Inside the Silver Spur Saloon, the piano player stopped mid-note as she entered. The swinging doors creaked behind her. The saloon smelled of whiskey, dust, and trouble. Men at poker tables turned to stare. A bartender polishing a glass leaned closer to another man and muttered, "That's the first proper lady we've seen here in months." The woman walked calmly to the bar. "I'm looking for the sheriff," she said. The bartender raised an eyebrow. "Well now, that depends. You in trouble, miss?" "No," she paused. "But someone else might be." Before the bartender could respond, a tall man stepped from the back room. Sheriff Daniel Carter. His gray mustache twitched as he studied her. "You the woman from the letter?" he asked. "Yes." She reached into her bag and handed him a folded paper. "My name is Clara Whitmore." The sheriff glanced at the letter and nodded slowly. "So they really sent someone?" Clara tilted her head slightly. "You sound surprised." The sheriff chuckled dryly. "Truth is, I didn't expect anyone brave or foolish enough to take this job." A few cowboys nearby laughed quietly. Clara didn't. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" she asked. The sheriff leaned closer. "You're here to watch a man." "Who?" He glanced toward the saloon doors. Like he expected someone to walk in. Then he lowered his voice. "Name's Colt Mercer." The laughter in the room died. Instantly, Clara noticed the sudden silence. Even the piano player stopped. "Why do I need to watch him?" she asked. The sheriff's eyes darkened. "Because folks in this town think he's gone mad." Outside town, miles away, stood Mercer Ranch, once the largest ranch in the region. Now, it was quiet, too quiet. Wind rattled the dry fences as a lone rider galloped across the open land. The man rode like the horse was part of him. Strong, controlled, dangerous colt. Mercer pulled the reins and stopped near a cliff overlooking the desert valley. His horse snorted softly. Colt stared into the distance. His dark beard was rough. His hat shadowed eyes that had seen too much. People in Red Hollow called him the Mad Cowboy, but the truth was more complicated, because every night, Mercer heard the same thing: screaming, gunshots, fire, and the memory of the night his entire life burned to ashes. He closed his eyes tightly. Then a voice echoed in his mind. Not memory, not imagination. A woman's voice. "Colt, help me." His eyes snapped open. He looked around the empty desert. Nothing. Just wind. Still. His hand moved slowly to the revolver at his hip. Back in Red Hollow, Clara Whitmore rode beside Sheriff Carter toward Mercer Ranch. The road stretched through miles of sun-baked land. "People say he's dangerous," the sheriff explained. "Dangerous how?" "He doesn't come into town anymore. Keeps to himself. Shoots at anyone who gets too close to the ranch." Clara frowned slightly. That doesn't sound like madness. The sheriff shrugged. Well, there's more. He hesitated. 3 years ago Mercer had a wife and a little boy. Clara's expression softened. What happened? The sheriff's voice dropped. Their house burned down. Silence fell between them. Accident? Clara asked. The sheriff looked out at the horizon. No, his words were cold. Murder. Clara's horse slowed slightly. Outlaws? Maybe, but nobody ever proved it. The sheriff sighed. Ever since that night, Mercer changed. They rode another mile before Clara asked quietly, "And you want me to watch him?" The sheriff nodded. His brother in California owns the ranch now. He's worried Mercer might snap completely. Clara looked ahead at the distant ranch house appearing on the horizon. And if he does? The sheriff didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, "Then you write the letter, and we come deal with it." The ranch stood alone against the vast desert sky, broken fences, weathered barns, but the land itself was beautiful. Wild horses ran across distant hills. Clara dismounted slowly. "So this is where he lives?" The sheriff nodded. "I'll leave you here." She looked surprised. "You're not staying?" "Mercer doesn't like visitors." He handed her a small revolver, just in case. Then he rode away, leaving her alone. The wind picked up dust around her boots. Clara walked toward the ranch house. Each step felt heavier. The front door creaked slightly as she reached the porch. She raised her hand to knock, but before she could, a voice behind her said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Clara froze. Slowly, she turned around. A man stood 20 feet away, tall, broad-shouldered, hat low over his eyes, a revolver pointed directly at her chest. Colt Mercer. His voice was calm, but dangerous. "You've got 5 seconds, he said, to explain why you're standing on my land." Clara met his gaze steadily. "My name is Clara Whitmore." Colt didn't lower the gun. "Never heard of you." "I was sent here." "By who?" "The sheriff." Colt's jaw tightened. "Then you should turn around." He cocked the revolver and ride back to town. Clara didn't move. Instead, she said something that made his expression change instantly. "They say you're mad." Silence filled the desert. Colt stared at her like he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Then slowly, he stepped closer. "Do I look mad to you?" he asked quietly. Clara studied him carefully. His eyes, his posture, the pain buried beneath both. "No," she said. "You look like a man who's been lied to." Colt's grip tightened on the revolver. "How would you know that?" Clara took a slow breath. Then she said the words that changed everything. "Because the night your wife died." She met his eyes. Someone else was there. The revolver in Colt's hand trembled slightly, and for the first time in 3 years, fear appeared in the mad cowboy's eyes. "What did you just say?" Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "I know who killed your family." Colt's finger slowly tightened on the trigger, and the wind howled across the empty desert as the truth began to surface. The wind swept across the empty plains surrounding Mercer Ranch, carrying dust and the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. Neither of them moved. Colt Mercer's revolver was still pointed straight at Clara Whitmore's heart, but his hand was no longer steady. "What did you just say?" Colt repeated, his voice lower now, almost dangerous. Clara could hear the pain buried beneath the threat. "I said," she answered slowly, "someone else was there the night your family died." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "Careful, miss," he said. "You start talking about that night, you better know exactly what you're saying." Clara didn't step back. Instead, she looked him straight in the eye. "I know it wasn't just a fire." Silence stretched across the ranch yard. The wind rattled the wooden porch behind them. Colt slowly lowered the revolver, but only halfway. "Everybody knows that," he muttered. "They said outlaws." "They were wrong." That made him pause for a moment. The hardened cowboy looked almost confused. "Then who?" he asked. Clara hesitated. "I don't know yet." Colt's eyes flashed with anger. The revolver lifted again. "You ride all the way out here," he said, voice rising. "Start digging up ghosts, And you don't even know what you're talking about? Clara lifted her hands calmly. I know enough. Then start explaining. Instead of answering, she asked a question. Do you remember hearing horses that night? Colt froze. The question hit him like a bullet. For 3 years, he had replayed the night of the fire in his mind. The flames, the screaming, the smoke choking the sky. But now, something stirred in the back of his memory, something he had tried to forget. Clara watched his expression carefully. You do remember, she said quietly. Colt's eyes darkened. Get off my land, he growled. Clara blinked. I'm not your enemy. I don't care what you are. He pointed toward the open desert. You've got 1 minute before I make you leave the hard way. Clara studied him carefully. She could see it now. The grief, the guilt, the rage, all tangled together inside him like barbed wire. This man wasn't mad. He was broken, and someone had made sure the truth never reached him. She turned toward her horse. Slowly. Fine, she said. Colt watched her closely. You're leaving? For now. She mounted the horse, but before riding away, she looked back at him. One more thing. Mr. Mercer. He didn't respond. Your son's room, she said softly. The window wasn't broken by the fire. Colt's head snapped up. Clara's voice stayed calm. It was broken from the outside. The color drained from Colt's face. How would you know that? He demanded. Clara pulled the horse's reins gently. Because someone paid me to find out, and with that, she rode away. Colt stood frozen in the ranch yard long after she disappeared over the hill. The wind carried dust across the empty land. His mind spun. Broken window, horses, someone else there. For 3 years he had believed the story everyone told him. Outlaws passed through, a stray lantern knocked over, tragic accident. But now, doubt crept in like poison. Finally, he turned toward the ranch house. The building stood quiet and weathered. Charred wood still marked parts of the structure where flames had once devoured everything. Colt pushed the door open slowly. Inside smelled of dust and old memories. He rarely entered anymore. Too many ghosts lived here. But today something felt different. He walked down the hallway. Each step echoed. Finally, he reached a small bedroom, his son's room. The door creaked open. Inside sat a tiny wooden bed. A toy horse rested on the floor beside it, exactly where it had been left 3 years ago. Colt's chest tightened. He walked to the window. Slowly, he examined the wooden frame. His breath stopped. There it was, a deep crack in the wood. Not from heat, not from falling debris. Bullet hole. Colt stumbled back. How did I miss that? He whispered. Outside the ranch, Clara Whitmore rode slowly toward town, but she wasn't smiling. In fact, she looked troubled, because she had only told Colt half the truth. The rest was far more dangerous. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, the town of Red Hollow came back into view. The sheriff was waiting outside the saloon. He stood up as she approached. Well, he asked, you met him? Yes. And Clara dismounted. He's not mad. The sheriff snorted. Everybody says that at first. I'm serious. She looked toward the distant desert. Someone destroyed his family on purpose. The sheriff's expression hardened. That's a dangerous claim. I know. Got proof? Not yet. The sheriff rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Then maybe you should stop digging. Clara met his eyes. Did you investigate the fire properly? The sheriff didn't answer. Instead, he lit a cigarette slowly. That was 3 years ago, he said. People move on. Clara's voice turned cold. Not everyone. The sheriff exhaled. Smoke. You're stirring up trouble. Maybe trouble needs stirring. He leaned closer. You know who owned the land next to Mercer Ranch back then? Clara shook her head. The sheriff looked toward the horizon. Lias Granger. The name meant nothing to Clara, but the sheriff's tone suggested it should. Biggest cattle baron in the territory, he explained, owns half the land around Red Hollow. Clara frowned. What does that have to do with the fire? The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. Maybe nothing. He flicked ash into the dirt, or maybe everything. Night settled over Red Hollow. Lanterns lit the dusty streets. Music drifted from the saloon. But far outside town, Colt Mercer rode hard through the darkness. He wasn't running from something. He was running toward answers. The memory of the cracked window haunted him. If Clara Whitmore was telling the truth, then someone had been inside his house that night. Someone who wanted his family dead. And that meant the fire wasn't an accident. It was murder. As Colt approached the old burned barn behind the ranch house, something caught his eye. A faint glow. Light. Inside the barn, Colt slid from his horse silently. His revolver appeared in his hand. Slowly, he stepped toward the door. Voices echoed inside. 2 men. One of them said quietly. "Boss," said Mercer, starting to ask questions again. Colt froze. The second man laughed. "Well, then maybe it's time the mad cowboy finally disappears." Colt's grip tightened on the gun, but then the first man said something that made his blood run cold. "Don't worry. The same man who ordered his family burned alive will finish the job." Colt kicked the barn door open. The men inside spun around in shock. Their eyes widened, because standing in the doorway, with murder in his eyes, was the man they thought had already lost his mind. Colt Mercer raised his revolver. "Start talking," and one of the men slowly reached for his own gun. The barn door slammed against the wall as Colt Mercer stepped inside. Lantern light flickered across the dusty floor. 2 men stood frozen near a stack of hay bales. Both were rough-looking riders with guns strapped to their hips. But the moment they saw Colt standing in the doorway, their confidence cracked. Because the stories about the mad cowboy weren't exaggerations. Colt's eyes looked colder than the desert at night. His revolver was steady. "Hands where I can see him," he ordered. The taller man slowly lifted his hands. "Easy now," he said nervously. "We were just talking about killing me." Colt stepped closer. The lantern light revealed his face more clearly now. Anger burned there, but beneath it, something darker. 3 years of grief. 3 years of unanswered questions. "Who sent you?" Colt demanded. The second man glanced at his partner. Neither spoke. Colt cocked the revolver. The sharp click echoed in the barn. "Let me make this simple," he said quietly. "You talk, or you leave here in a box." The taller man swallowed. "You don't understand," he muttered. "Oh, I think I do." Colt's voice was ice. "You were just saying someone ordered my family burned alive." Silence. Then, the shorter man shook his head quickly. "We didn't mean." Colt fired. The bullet smashed into a wooden beam, inches from the man's head. The echo thundered through the barn. "Next one won't miss." Both men flinched. The taller one spoke quickly. All right. Colt didn't blink. "Name?" The man hesitated, then he whispered, "Granger." The name hit Colt like a hammer. "Elias Granger." The man nodded slowly. Colt felt his chest tighten. Granger owned half the land surrounding Red Hollow. A cattle baron. Rich. Powerful. Untouchable. "Why?" Colt demanded. The men looked uneasy. "Your ranch sits on the only water source for miles," the shorter man said quietly. "Granger wanted it." Colt's fists clenched. "So he burned my house down?" The taller man shook his head quickly. No. The fire wasn't supposed to happen like that." Colt's eyes darkened. "What does that mean?" Before the man could answer, a gunshot exploded outside. The barn window shattered. Colt ducked instantly. More shots rang out. Bullets ripped through the wooden walls. "Ambush!" one of the men shouted. Colt rolled behind a stack of crates. Dust filled the air as bullets punched through the barn siding. Outside, at least 4 riders fired from horseback. Colt cursed under his breath. "Granger's men?" he asked. The taller man nodded nervously. "They don't want us talk." Another bullet smashed through the lantern. Darkness swallowed the barn. Only moonlight filtered through the broken boards. The gunfire stopped. Silence returned. Heavy. Deadly. Colt moved carefully toward the doorway. Then, suddenly, a horse galloped into the yard. A woman's voice shouted, "Colt, He froze. Clara Whitmore rode into the ranch yard at full speed. Gunshots erupted again. One bullet struck the dirt near her horse's hooves. "Get down!" Colt yelled. Clara slid from the saddle and rolled behind the water trough. "Looks like your friends brought company," she called. Colt cursed. "What are you doing back here?" "Saving your life." Another bullet whizzed past her head. Colt fired back. His shot knocked one of the riders clean off his horse. The others scattered behind the barn and fence posts. Clara peeked over the trough and fired. Her bullet shattered a lantern one outlaw was holding. Darkness spread across the yard. For a moment, everything went quiet. The remaining riders pulled back slightly. Colt turned toward the barn, but the two men inside were gone. "Damn it," he muttered. They had escaped through the back. Clara ran to his side. "You all right?" Colt looked at her sharply. "Why did you come back?" She reloaded her revolver. "Because the sheriff lied to me." Colt raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Clara hesitated. Then she said quietly, "The man who hired me wasn't your brother." Colt stiffened. "Then who?" Clara met his eyes. "Elias Granger." The name hung in the air. Colt felt the anger rise again. "So he sends you to spy on me?" "No." Her voice softened. "He sent me to prove you were insane." Colt's jaw tightened. "So he could take the ranch?" "Yes." Another gunshot cracked through the night. The outlaws had regrouped. "Looks like Granger changed his plan," Clara said. Colt glanced toward the darkness. "Yeah." His voice turned cold. "Now he wants me dead." Hoofbeats suddenly thundered across the ranch. More riders. Too many. Clara counted quickly. 7. Maybe 8. Colt reloaded calmly. "That's not good odds." Clara looked at him sideways. "You always this calm when people try to kill you?" "Only on Tuesdays." Despite the danger, she almost smiled. Then the riders appeared at the edge of the yard. One of them shouted, "Mercer, throw down your gun." Colt stepped forward slightly. "No." The rider laughed. "Then tonight's the night the mad cowboy finally dies." Colt's eyes narrowed. "Maybe." He glanced at Clara. "You any good with that gun?" She raised an eyebrow. "I grew up in Kansas." That didn't answer the question. She fired suddenly. The bullet knocked a rifle out of an outlaw's hands. Colt smirked. "Good enough." The riders charged. Gunfire exploded across the ranch. Colt moved like lightning. His shots were precise, deadly. 2 riders fell. Another fled into the darkness. Clara fired again, forcing the rest to scatter. Within seconds, the yard was silent. Again, the surviving outlaws rode away into the night. Clara lowered her gun slowly. "Well," she breathed. That escalated quickly. Colt stared toward the desert where the riders had disappeared. "They'll be back." Clara nodded. "Yes." Then she looked at him carefully. "And next time, they'll bring Granger himself." Colt turned toward the house slowly. 3 years ago, everything he loved had burned. Now, he knew why. Because someone powerful wanted his land, and they had killed his family to get it. Colt's voice was barely a whisper. "Granger started this." Clara studied him carefully. "And how do you plan to end it?" Colt's eyes turned darker than the desert night. "With a bullet." Clara opened her mouth to reply, but suddenly, she noticed something in the dirt near the barn. Boot tracks. Fresh ones. Leading toward the back of the ranch. She followed them slowly. Then her breath caught. Because the tracks stopped beside something half buried in the dirt. A small silver locket. Clara picked it up carefully. Inside was a faded photograph. A woman and a little boy. Colt's wife. Colt's son. But behind them, barely visible in the background of the photo, stood another man Clara recognized instantly. Her voice shook slightly. "Colt." He walked over. "What is it?" She handed him the locket. "Someone from that night was closer to your family than you think." Colt looked down at the photograph. His expression froze. Because the man standing behind his wife in the picture was someone he trusted. Someone who had been there the night of the fire. Someone who claimed to have tried to save them. Colt's Voice turned cold with disbelief. The sheriff. Clara looked at him. Slowly. Yes. And at that exact moment, back in Red Hollow, Sheriff Daniel Carter quietly loaded his shotgun, because he had just received word. Mercer's starting to remember. The sheriff cocked the weapon slowly, then muttered to himself. Then it's time the mad cowboy dies for good. The desert night hung heavy over Mercer Ranch. The gunfight had ended, but the silence that followed felt even more dangerous. Moonlight spread across the yard, illuminating broken boards, fallen lanterns, and the empty saddles of horses whose riders had fled. Clara Whitmore still held the silver locket in her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly, because the photograph inside had revealed something impossible. She slowly turned toward Colt Mercer. He hadn't spoken since seeing it. He simply stood there, staring at the small picture like it might suddenly change. The sheriff. Colt finally whispered. The words barely left his throat. Clara nodded slowly. I didn't want to believe it either. Colt clenched the locket in his fist. His voice turned rough. That man carried my boy's coffin. The memory hit him like a bullet. 3 years ago, Sheriff Daniel Carter had stood beside him at the funeral. He had placed a hand on Colt's shoulder and said, "We'll find who did this." But now, the truth felt uglier than any lie. Clara stepped closer. Maybe there's another explanation. Colt laughed bitterly. No. He opened the locket again. The photo showed his wife Emily, smiling as she held their son, and behind them stood Carter, too close. Watching them, Clara noticed something else. Colt. He looked up. What? She pointed to the background. Look at where that photo was taken. Colt squinted. Behind the family stood the wooden fence of the ranch, but beyond it, another structure, a wagon marked with the cattle brand. Clara recognized it immediately. That's the Granger brand, she said. Quietly, Colt's stomach twisted. Elias Granger, the cattle baron who wanted his land, the man whose name the outlaws had spoken. Now the pieces were falling into place. Granger and Carter were working together. Colt muttered. Clara nodded. And if they tried to kill you tonight? Her voice turned grim. Then they know we're getting close. Colt looked toward the dark desert. The wind carried sand across the yard. For the first time in years, something burned in his chest that wasn't grief. It was purpose. They took everything from me, he said quietly. Clara studied him carefully. And if you go after them alone, they'll take your life too. Colt looked at her. His voice softened slightly. Why are you helping me? Clara hesitated, because the truth wasn't simple. When Granger had first hired her, he had told her a very different story. He said Colt Mercer had gone mad, dangerous, unstable. He needed proof to take control of the ranch. But the moment she met Colt, she knew that wasn't the truth. Now, she was caught between two powerful men, one who had hired her, and one she had started to care about. I believe you deserve the truth, she said finally. Colt held her gaze. You could have left. Yes. But I didn't. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them shifted. Something warmer, something dangerous in a different way. Clara broke the silence. We need proof. Colt nodded. Proof of what they did. And where do we find that? Colt turned toward the distant lights of Red Hollow. Inside Granger's office, Clara blinked. You want to break into the most powerful man's building in town? Colt shrugged. I've had worse ideas. Clara sighed. You really are a mad cowboy. He almost smiled. Before they could continue, hoofbeats echoed in the distance. Both of them froze. Clara's hand moved to her revolver. Colt stepped forward. More riders. The horses approached. Fast. Too fast. Then a gunshot rang out. Clara gasped. The bullet struck the ground inches from her foot. Down. Colt shouted. They both dove behind the water trough. 5 riders stormed into the yard. But these men weren't shooting randomly. They rode straight for Clara. One of them shouted, "Boss wants the girl alive." Colt's eyes widened. Clara, run. She fired at the nearest rider. Her shot forced him to swerve, but another outlaw swung from his saddle and grabbed her arm. Clara struggled. Her revolver fell into the dirt. Colt jumped up and fired twice. 2 riders dropped, but the others had already pulled Clara onto a horse. She kicked and fought Colt. The horse spun and bolted toward the desert. Colt fired again, but the rider holding Clara ducked low. Within seconds they were racing across the dark plains. Colt ran for his horse, but they already had a lead. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Silence returned to Mercer Ranch. Colt stood in the yard breathing hard. His fists shook, because the one person who had helped him find the truth had just been taken. Meanwhile, miles away, Clara Whitmore struggled as the horse galloped through the desert. The outlaw behind her tightened his grip. "Stop fighting," he growled. "You're worth more alive." Clara glared at him. "Granger?" The man laughed. "Oh yeah, he's been wanting to meet you." They rode for nearly an hour before reaching a massive ranch house surrounded by fences and armed guards. Granger Ranch. Lanterns glowed across the property. The riders dismounted and dragged Clara from the saddle. She was pushed toward the front porch. The door opened slowly. A tall man stepped out. Expensive coat, perfectly groomed mustache, cold eyes. Elias Granger. He looked Clara up and down calmly. "Well," he said, "looks like my investigators switched sides." Clara lifted her chin. "You murdered a family." Granger chuckled softly. "That's a strong accusation. You sent men to burn Mercer's house." Granger's expression barely changed. "Careful, Miss Whitmore." He stepped closer. "Accusations without proof can get people killed." Clara didn't flinch. "Colt knows." Granger smiled slightly. "That's unfortunate." His voice turned cold. "Because tomorrow morning, Colt Mercer dies." Clara's heart dropped. "You won't get away with this." Granger leaned close enough for her to smell cigar smoke. "Oh, I already have." Then he added something that made Clara's blood run cold. "And after Mercer's gone, no one will remember you were ever here." He turned to his men. "Lock her in the barn." As they dragged her away, Clara looked toward the dark desert, hoping, praying, that somewhere out there, the mad cowboy was already coming for her. And far across the plains, Colt Mercer rode like a storm. His horse thundered across the desert. His mind burned with one thought. They had taken Clara, and this time, he wasn't going to lose someone else. But as he approached the hills near Granger Ranch, he suddenly saw something that made him pull the reins. Dozens of lanterns, armed guards, riders everywhere. Granger had been waiting. Colt stared at the heavily guarded ranch, then whispered to himself, "Well, this is gonna get interesting." The moon hung low above the desert as Colt Mercer stared down at Granger Ranch from the rocky hill. Lanterns glowed across the property like scattered stars. But Colt wasn't admiring the view. He was counting enemies. 2 by the gate, 3 near the barn, another on the porch. He muttered, "Too many." But Colt Mercer had never been a man who waited for fair odds, because tonight wasn't about survival. Tonight was about justice. He pulled his hat lower and checked the chambers of his revolver. 6 bullets, 6 chances, and somewhere down there, Clara Whitmore was waiting. Meanwhile, inside the large barn, Clara sat tied to a wooden post. Her wrists burned from the rope. Moonlight slipped through the gaps in the wooden boards. She could hear the guards outside laughing. One of them said, "Mercer's a fool if he comes here." The other replied, "Granger hopes he does." Clara closed her eyes. She knew Colt well enough now to understand one thing. He would come, and that scared her more than anything, because Granger had turned the entire ranch into a trap. Outside, Colt slid down the rocky hill like a silent shadow. He moved through the tall grass toward the fence, every step careful, every movement controlled. The wind helped hide his approach. One guard leaned against the gate post, bored. He never saw Colt until it was too late. A single punch dropped him silently into the dirt. Colt caught the man. Before he hit the ground, he dragged the unconscious guard behind a wagon, then slipped through the gates. Now, he was inside, but as Colt moved toward the barn, a voice echoed behind him. "I knew you'd come." Colt froze. He turned slowly. Standing on the porch of the ranch house, holding a rifle, was Sheriff Daniel Carter. Lantern light revealed his calm expression. Colt's eyes turned cold. "You burned my family alive," he said. Quietly, Carter shook his head. "Not exactly." He stepped off the porch. Granger gave the order. Colt's fists tightened. "But you helped." The sheriff didn't deny it. Instead he sighed. "You should have sold that ranch when you had the chance. It wasn't for sale." "Everything's for sale." Colt raised his revolver. "Not my family." Before Carter could respond, another voice interrupted. "Gentlemen, let's not ruin the evening." Elias Granger stepped out from the house. Two armed men stood behind him. Granger smiled like this was all a pleasant conversation. "I must say, Mercer, I admire your determination." Colt aimed the revolver at his chest. "Let Clara go." Granger chuckled. "Oh, she's safe." He gestured toward the barn. "For now." Colt's jaw tightened. "You burned my house." Granger shrugged. "I wanted the land. You killed my wife and son." Granger's smile faded slightly. "That part was unfortunate." The words ignited something inside Colt. Gunfire erupted instantly. Colt shot one of Granger's men before the others could react. Carter fired his rifle. The bullet grazed Colt's shoulder. Colt ducked behind a water barrel. Chaos exploded across the ranch. Inside the barn, Clara heard the gunshots. Her heart raced. "Colt." She struggled against the ropes desperately. Outside, Colt rolled across the dirt and fired again. Another outlaw fell, but Carter advanced steadily with the rifle. "You should have stayed broken, Mercer." The sheriff shouted. Colt fired back. The bullet smashed Carter's lantern. Darkness swallowed the yard. Only moonlight remained. Colt used the darkness to move. He rushed toward the barn. Carter fired blindly. A bullet struck the barn door as Colt kicked it open. Inside, Clara looked up. "Colt." He ran to her and cut the ropes with his knife. "You all right?" "Mostly." She grabbed a revolver lying nearby. "Looks like the party started." Colt smirked despite the chaos. "Ready to finish it?" Clara cocked the revolver. "Let's." They stepped back outside together. The final battle had begun. Gunshots echoed across Granger Ranch. Colt and Clara fought side by side, back to back, like they had been doing it their entire lives. One outlaw rushed toward them. Clara fired. He dropped. Instantly, Colt moved toward the porch where Elias Granger stood, but suddenly Sheriff Carter appeared behind him. The rifle pointed straight at Colt's back. "End of the line," Carter said. Colt slowly turned. Carter's eyes looked tired. "Now, this was never personal," the sheriff muttered. "It was money." Colt's voice stayed calm. "You helped murder a child." For the first time, Carter looked ashamed, but it passed quickly. He pulled the trigger. The rifle exploded, but the bullet missed. Because Clara had fired first, her shot knocked the rifle from Carter's hands. Colt lunged forward and tackled the sheriff to the ground. The two men struggled in the dirt. Years of rage fueled Colt's strength. Carter reached for a hidden knife. Colt saw it. He grabbed Carter's wrist. The blade fell into the dust. Colt raised his revolver slowly. Carter stared up at him. "Go ahead," the sheriff whispered. "Do it." Colt's finger tightened, but then he stopped. Instead, he said quietly, "You're going to live." Carter frowned. "Why?" Colt stood up. "So you can face justice." Behind them, Clara confronted Elias Granger. The cattle baron held a pistol, but his hands trembled slightly. "You're making a mistake," he said. Clara didn't lower her gun. "You burned a family alive." Granger laughed nervously. "It was business." Before he could react, Colt fired. The bullet struck Granger's pistol and knocked it from his hand. Granger stumbled backward. He looked around wildly. His men were gone. The ranch was silent, defeated. Granger slowly raised his hands. "All right," he muttered. "You win." Dawn began to rise over the desert. Golden sunlight spread across the land. By morning, the sheriff and Granger were riding toward Red Hollow in chains. Justice was finally coming. Later, Colt stood outside the old ranch house. The wind moved gently across the fields. Clara approached quietly. "You did the right thing," she said. Colt looked toward the horizon. "For 3 years, I thought I lost everything." Clara hesitated. "Did you?" Colt turned toward her. For the first time, the pain in his eyes had softened. "Not everything." Clara smiled faintly. "So what happens now, Mr. Mercer?" He looked across the ranch. Fields, horses, a future. Then he looked back at her. "Well, this place could use someone who isn't afraid of a mad cowboy." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Is that a job offer?" Colt nodded. "Or maybe something more." She stepped closer. The sunrise painted the sky in warm colors, and for the first time in years, Mercer Ranch felt alive again. Clara took his hand. "I think I'll stay." The wind carried the sound of horses running across the plains, and the story of the mad cowboy finally became something new. A story of justice, a story of healing, and a love born in the wild heart of the West.